the lies they built, and the truth that destroyed them. The day my life was destroyed, the morning my reputation died, began like any other. I was watering the roses outside my small home in Portland when I noticed the silence. Neighbors who used to wave suddenly looked away. A woman walking her dog crossed the street. At first, I thought it was my imagination, until my phone rang. "Lynn, I think you should see this," my coworker Rachel said quietly. A few seconds later, a link appeared. It was a post on a community forum for our neighborhood in Willow Creek neighborhood. My stomach dropped as I read the headline. "Warning: be careful around Lynn Fortman." The post accused me of things so disgusting I felt physically sick. It claimed I had been stealing packages, spying through people's windows, even harassing children. Hundreds of comments. People calling me dangerous, unstable, and the worst part? 2 names appeared over and over again in the comments. My neighbors. Tracy and Mark Halvorson, the couple who lived next door. The same people I had helped move furniture just 2 months ago. My hands trembled as I read their comments. "We've had problems with Lynn for years." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't gossip. This was a deliberate destruction of my life. And by sunset that same day, the police were knocking on my door. And I had no idea the nightmare was only beginning. Before I continue, please subscribe to my channel to see more interesting stories. Thank you. Public enemy on my own street. The police officer stood on my porch with an apologetic expression. "We received a complaint, Miss Fortman." A complaint. That word felt almost laughable compared to the lies circulating about me. They asked if they could look around my house. Apparently, someone had reported that I was storing stolen packages. My chest burned with humiliation as they walked through my living room. Everything I owned suddenly felt like evidence. They found nothing. Of course, they found nothing. But the damage was already done. By that evening, the rumors had spread far beyond Portland. My boss called me. "Lynn, until this situation clears up, we think it's best you take leave." Leave. Translation: don't come back until people stop thinking you're a criminal. That night, I couldn't sleep. From my bedroom window, I saw lights flicker in the Halvorsons' house. I watched them laughing in their kitchen. Laughing. My life was collapsing, and they were celebrating. That was when I realized something else. These accusations were too detailed, too specific. Someone had been watching me, and suddenly a memory surfaced. 2 weeks ago, I had noticed a small black camera attached to their fence, pointed directly at my backyard. My heart began to pound. What if the lies weren't random? What if they were preparing something bigger, and I had just walked straight into their trap? The lie that went viral. By the 3rd day, the lies had exploded online. Someone had taken the original post and turned it into a video titled, "The Creepy Neighbor of Willow Creek." It had already reached thousands of views. The comments were brutal. People were saying I should be arrested, that I shouldn't live near families. I felt like my entire identity had been erased overnight. At the grocery store, a cashier refused to make eye contact with me. A man in the parking lot muttered, "That's her." Her. Like I was some kind of urban legend. But the worst moment came that afternoon. A delivery driver arrived at my house with 3 packages. None of them belonged to me. They were addressed to other homes in Portland. My stomach dropped, because suddenly I understood something horrifying. If someone discovered those packages in my house, it would prove every accusation. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Across the street, Tracy Halvorson was standing on her porch, holding her phone, recording, waiting for me to make the mistake they had planned. That was when I realized something else. This wasn't just gossip. This was a setup. And if I didn't start fighting back soon, they were going to bury me with their lies. The first crack in their story. I didn't touch the packages. Instead, I walked straight across the street, right toward Tracy Halvorson. Her smile tightened when she saw me coming. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly. I held up the packages. These were delivered to my house by mistake. Her eyes flickered for just a second, just long enough for me to notice. "Oh, that's strange," she said. Behind her, I saw Mark standing inside their doorway. watching, studying my reaction. That's when I decided to do something unexpected. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Just to be clear, I said calmly, "You're saying these packages don't belong to you?" Tracy's smile froze. "They're not ours." "Perfect." I turned the packages so the labels faced the camera. Every single one had their address on it. Her face drained of color. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mark stepped forward quickly. "Must be a delivery error," he said. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But one thing was suddenly obvious. They hadn't expected me to record the conversation. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I saw something in their eyes. Fear. But I still didn't know the worst part of their plan. Because later that night, someone called the police again. And this time, they had evidence. The evidence that almost destroyed me. When the police returned that night, they didn't look apologetic anymore. They looked serious. "Ms. Fortman," the officer said, "we received surveillance footage." My heart dropped. "Footage of you taking packages from porches." The world seemed to tilt. "That's impossible," I whispered. The officer turned his tablet toward me. The video was grainy, but the woman in the footage looked like me. Same hair, same height, same jacket. She walked up to a porch, grabbed a package, and left. My stomach twisted with dread. "Where did this come from?" I asked. The officer glanced at his notes. "Your neighbors. The Halvorsons." Of course it did. Suddenly, everything made sense. The camera on their fence, the packages, the rumors. They were building a case against me. Frame by frame, lie by lie. "Until this is resolved," the officer said, "we recommend you stay home." Stay home, like a suspect. After they left, I sat alone in the dark. My life was hanging by a thread, and the people destroying it lived 30 feet away. But as I replayed the video in my mind, something started to bother me. One tiny detail. The woman in the footage wore my jacket. The same blue one I hung on my backyard chair every evening. My chest tightened, because suddenly I understood. That woman in the video was never meant to look like me. She was wearing my clothes. And that meant one terrifying thing. Someone had been inside my yard. The lies they built, and the truth that destroyed them. The night I set my first trap, I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I walked into my backyard in Portland, staring at the chair where my blue jacket used to hang. The jacket that had appeared in the fake surveillance video. Someone had taken it and returned it, which meant one thing. They had been inside my yard. My pulse pounded as I searched the fence line. That's when I noticed something I had overlooked before. A small gap in the wooden boards, just wide enough for someone to squeeze through. I crouched beside it, staring at the dirt. Footprints. Fresh ones. The realization hit me like ice water. The Halvorsons hadn't just spread lies. They had physically entered my property to build their story. But instead of calling the police, I did something different. Something smarter. I ordered 3 small security cameras online that same night. By midnight, I had hidden them around my yard. One facing the fence gap, one near the chair where my jacket hung, and one aimed directly toward the Halvorsons' backyard. If they came again, I would be waiting. But as I returned inside, a thought crept into my mind that made my chest tighten. What if they didn't just want to frame me? What if they wanted something much bigger? Because people don't destroy someone's life this carefully, without a reason. And I was about to find out exactly what that reason was. The midnight visitor. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed at 2:13 a.m. Motion alert. My heart began racing as I opened the camera app. The screen flickered. Then the image appeared. Someone was climbing through the fence gap, wearing dark clothes, a hood. But I recognized the posture instantly. Mark Halvorson. My hands trembled as I watched him step into my yard. He moved quietly, like someone who had done this before. He walked straight toward the chair. The same chair where my jacket used to hang. Then he pulled something from his backpack. Another jacket. Blue. Just like mine. My stomach twisted. He was planting evidence again. But before he could leave, the backyard light suddenly turned on. He froze. Slowly he turned. And there I was. standing on the porch, watching him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, he forced a laugh. "Oh, Lynn. I thought I saw someone sneaking around your yard." I held up my phone. "Recording. You mean like you're doing right now?" His smile disappeared. The camera captured everything. His face, the jacket, the backpack. And the moment he realized, he had just walked straight into my trap. But I still didn't know why they were doing this. That answer would come the next morning. And it would change everything. The secret they were hiding. The next morning, I did something unexpected. Instead of confronting them, I started researching, specifically the Halvorsons. It didn't take long before something strange appeared. Mark Halvorson wasn't just a friendly neighbor. He was a real estate investor. My stomach tightened as I kept digging. Most of the houses in our neighborhood in Willow Creek neighborhood had been quietly purchased over the last 2 years. Bought through different companies. But they all traced back to the same investor group. Mark's company. My pulse quickened. I opened a zoning proposal filed with the city. And there it was. A massive redevelopment plan. Luxury condos. Retail space. A parking structure. The entire neighborhood was scheduled to be demolished. Except there was one problem. One single house refusing to sell. Mine. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Now everything made sense. The rumors. The setup. The police calls. If they could label me a criminal, or force me out, they could finally buy the last property they needed. My home. But what they didn't know yet was that I now had proof of Mark trespassing. Proof of him planting evidence. Proof that could destroy his entire plan. And suddenly I realized something powerful. They thought they were ruining my life. But in reality, they had handed me the weapon that would destroy theirs. Turning the tables. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because the nightmare was over, but because I finally understood the game. And now I could play it better than they ever expected. I spent the next 2 days quietly gathering evidence. Screenshots of the online lies. Recordings of Tracy accusing me. The video of Mark in my backyard. Every piece fit together like a puzzle. Then I made a phone call. A lawyer in Seattle who specialized in defamation and property disputes. After watching the footage, she leaned back slowly. "Lynn, do you realize how serious this is?" "How serious?" I asked. She smiled. "They tried to frame you for a crime to force you to sell your house." My throat tightened. That's fraud. Defamation. Criminal trespassing. She paused. And possibly conspiracy. The words hung in the air like thunder. For weeks I had felt powerless. Now I understood something incredible. They hadn't just hurt me. They had broken the law. In several different ways. My lawyer leaned forward. We could sue them. I thought about the humiliation. The whispers. The destroyed reputation. "No," I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "No." I smiled coldly. "I want something much bigger than a lawsuit." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I started planning my revenge. The truth begins to leak. My revenge didn't begin with anger. It began with patience. 2 weeks later, the Halvorsons hosted a neighborhood meeting in Portland. They invited everyone, except me. From my living room window, I watched neighbors walk into their house. People who once trusted me. People who now believed I was dangerous. But what they didn't know was that my lawyer had already filed something with the court that morning. A request for a subpoena. Access to Mark Halvorson's company records. If approved, it would expose the entire redevelopment scheme. The lies. The manipulation. The financial motive. But I had something even better planned for that meeting. At exactly 7:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. My lawyer. "It's done," she said. The subpoena was approved. Perfect timing. Because across the street, Tracy Halvorson suddenly stepped outside. She walked toward my house with an uncomfortable smile. I opened the door before she could knock. Her voice sounded nervous. "Lynn, we think there's been a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding.
Ist sehr daherkommlich.
Behind her, I could see neighbors watching from the windows. Listening. Waiting. I stepped aside and said something that made her face pale instantly.
Come in, Tracy.
She hesitated. Why? I smiled. Because I think it's time we watch a video together. The video of her husband breaking into my yard. And this was only the beginning. The lies they built, and the truth that destroyed them. The video that changed everything. Tracy stepped into my living room cautiously. Her eyes scanned the room like she expected a trap. In a way, she was right. Lynn, she began, forcing a polite smile. We really think things got blown out of proportion. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned the television on. The screen flickered. Then the footage started. Grainy night vision. My backyard in Portland. The fence.
The chair.
And then, Mark Halvorson climbing through the gap. Tracy's breath caught instantly. On the screen, Mark pulled the blue jacket from his bag and placed it carefully where mine used to hang. He looked around nervously before leaving. The video ended. The room went silent. Tracy's face had turned pale. That's not what it looks like, she stammered. I folded my arms slowly. Really? Across the street, I could see neighbors watching through their windows. Some had stepped onto their porches. The rumor mill had already drawn attention. Your husband planted evidence on my property, I said calmly. She shook her head desperately. You don't understand. Then explain. Her voice dropped to a whisper. If Mark's investors see that video, we lose everything. Investors. The word confirmed everything I had discovered. This was never about personal hatred. It was about money. But Tracy had no idea how far the situation had already gone. Because that very morning, a judge had signed the subpoena. And soon the truth behind their entire scheme would start coming out. The cracks in their empire. 3 days later, things started moving quickly. My lawyer in Seattle called me early that morning. Lynn, we received the first batch of financial records. My heart began racing. And she exhaled slowly. It's worse than we expected. Apparently, Mark Halvorson's redevelopment company had already promised investors a completed project in Willow Creek neighborhood. Construction deadlines. Financial guarantees. Millions of dollars at stake. But there was one critical condition in the contract. The company had to acquire every property in the neighborhood, including mine. If even one homeowner refused to sell, the deal would collapse. Penalties would trigger. Investors could sue. Which explained everything. The rumors. The police reports. The fake videos. Mark had been trying to force me out. Not just quietly, but violently enough to make the entire neighborhood turn against me. So, what happens if this evidence becomes public? I asked. My lawyer didn't hesitate. His company collapses. I stared out the window at the Halvorsons' house. Lights were on. People moving inside. They looked so confident. So secure. But they had no idea something terrifying had already begun. The truth was slowly working its way through their empire. And when it finally surfaced, their entire life would shatter. When the lies started falling apart. The first domino fell on a Tuesday afternoon. A police detective knocked on my door. I believe we owe you an apology, Miss Fortman. I invited him inside cautiously. He placed a tablet on my kitchen table. We reviewed the surveillance footage your neighbors provided. My stomach tightened. And he zoomed in on the image. Something seemed off. The footage paused on the moment the woman stole a package. The detective pointed at her hands. She's wearing gloves. That alone wasn't strange. But then he zoomed further. Look closely. My breath caught. The fingers were longer. Thinner. Different. That woman isn't you, he said. My chest filled with relief. Who is she? The detective leaned back. We believe it might be Tracy Halvorson. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The woman spreading lies about me might have been the one committing the crimes herself. And there's more, he added. Apparently, several neighbors in Portland had recently reported stolen packages. Packages that mysteriously appeared during the weeks Tracy had been accusing me online. The detective's voice grew serious. If our suspicion is correct, your neighbors may have staged every incident. I stared at the Halvorsons' house through the window. The truth was getting closer. And soon, the lies they had built around me would collapse directly on top of them. The investors start asking questions. The next crack came from somewhere unexpected. Mark's investors. Two black SUVs pulled into the Halvorsons' driveway that evening. Men in expensive suits stepped out. From my porch, I watched them enter the house. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw the aftermath. Raised voices. A slammed door. One of the men stormed outside, shouting into his phone. The next morning, my lawyer called again. Lynn, someone leaked the subpoena to the investors. I nearly laughed. What happened? Panic. Apparently, the investors were furious. If the defamation lawsuit went public, the redevelopment project in Willow Creek neighborhood could be frozen immediately. Banks might pull financing. City regulators could investigate. Millions could disappear overnight. Mark Halvorson is in serious trouble, she said. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the balance shifting. The same fear that had haunted me for weeks was now creeping into their house. And that night, something unexpected happened. Someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, Mark Halvorson was standing there, and he looked terrified. The first begging. Mark Halvorson no longer looked like the confident neighbor who had destroyed my reputation. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale. Lynn, we need to talk. I leaned against the doorframe. Do we? He swallowed hard. Please. After a long pause, I stepped outside. The street in Portland was quiet, but several neighbors watched from their windows. Word had already started spreading. Look, Mark said quickly. Things got out of control. Out of control. I almost laughed. You accused me of being a criminal. I know. You sent police to my house. I know. You destroyed my reputation. His voice cracked. I'll fix it. That word hung in the air.
Fix. How?
I asked quietly. We'll tell everyone the truth. I stared at him carefully. For weeks he had treated me like an obstacle. Now he looked like a drowning man. There's just one thing, he added nervously.
What?
His voice dropped to a whisper. You have to sell your house. And suddenly I understood something important. Even now, even while begging, he still believed he could control the ending. But he had no idea how wrong he was. Because the real downfall of the Halvorsons had only just begun. The lies they built, and the truth that destroyed them. The offer I refused. Mark stood in front of my porch like a man who had run out of options. Name your price, he said. The street in Portland was quiet, but I could feel eyes watching from behind curtains. For weeks these same neighbors had believed every lie about me. Now, they were witnessing the beginning of the truth. You think this is about money? I asked quietly. Mark rubbed his temples. Lynn, the investors are furious. If you sell your house, this all ends. I stared at him. The arrogance was still there, even after everything he had done. You ruined my reputation, I said slowly. You tried to frame me for a crime. I panicked, he muttered. Your panic nearly destroyed my life. Silence filled the air between us. Then he made the mistake that sealed his fate. I'll double the market value, he said. I smiled faintly, not because I was tempted, but because he still didn't understand something. The fight was no longer about my house.
It was about justice.
You're not buying my home, I told him calmly. His face fell. So, what do you want? I looked him directly in the eyes. The truth. And very soon, the entire neighborhood would hear it. The meeting that exposed everything. 2 nights later, another neighborhood meeting was scheduled in Willow Creek neighborhood. This time, I showed up. The room went silent the moment I walked in. Whispers filled the air. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry. Mark stood near the front of the room, clearly shocked to see me. Lynn, he said stiffly. This meeting is for residents only. I live here, I replied. Before he could argue, I connected my laptop to the projector. The screen lit up. A video appeared. My backyard. The fence. Then Mark climbing through it. Gasps echoed around the room. Someone whispered, Is that Mark? The video continued. Him planting the blue jacket, looking around nervously, then leaving. The silence that followed felt heavy. I turned toward the crowd. For weeks, I said calmly, my neighbors accused me of being a thief. People shifted uneasily in their chairs. But this video shows the truth. All eyes slowly turned toward Mark. His face had gone pale, and suddenly the lies he had built so carefully started collapsing in front of everyone. But the most shocking moment of the night was still coming, because Tracy Halvorson suddenly stood up, and what she said next would destroy her husband completely. The betrayal. Tracy's voice trembled as she stood. Mark, tell them the truth. The entire room froze. Mark looked at her in disbelief. Tracy, sit down. But she didn't. Instead, she turned toward the neighbors. You deserve to know what really happened. My heart pounded as the room held its breath. Mark needed Lynn's house, she said. Murmurs spread through the crowd. He promised investors a redevelopment project, but Lynn refused to sell. People began glancing at each other. So, he decided to make her life miserable until she left. Mark's voice exploded. Stop talking, but it was too late. Tracy's eyes filled with tears.
He staged the thefts.
He told me to record videos accusing Lynn online. A wave of shock swept through the room. The detective who had investigated the case stood quietly near the back, listening, watching, and suddenly, the entire narrative flipped. The woman everyone had believed was dangerous was actually the victim. But Tracy wasn't finished. There's something else, she whispered. Something in her tone made my stomach twist. Mark didn't just lie to the neighborhood. She turned slowly toward the investors standing in the doorway. He lied to you too. And the truth behind the entire scheme was about to explode. The collapse. The room turned chaotic. One of the investors stepped forward angrily. Mark, what is she talking about? Mark looked cornered, desperate. It's not what it sounds like. But Tracy shook her head. He promised them every house in Willow Creek neighborhood was already secured. Gasps filled the room. But Lynn never agreed to sell. The investor's face darkened. You guaranteed the land acquisition. Mark's silence said everything. I stood quietly near the back, watching the moment his empire crumbled. One lie had created another, then another, until the entire structure collapsed. You've cost us millions, one investor snapped. Across the room, the detective stepped forward. Mr. Halvorson, we also need to discuss the false police reports. Mark's face went white. The charges were stacking up. Fraud, defamation, trespassing, conspiracy. For weeks I had felt powerless. Now the truth was finally speaking for itself. But the most powerful moment hadn't happened yet. Because later that night, Mark Halvorson would lose something far worse than money. He would lose everything. The street that turned against them. The next morning felt surreal. For the first time in weeks, people in Portland looked at me differently. A woman who had avoided me for days approached my mailbox. I'm sorry, she said quietly. One by one, the apologies started coming. Neighbors who once whispered behind my back now looked ashamed. The rumors had spread quickly, but the truth had spread even faster. Across the street, the Halvorsons' house looked dark and empty. Moving trucks had arrived. Apparently, the investors had already forced Mark out of the company. The redevelopment project had collapsed overnight.
Miljongun.
Reputations destroyed. But what surprised me most was seeing Tracy sitting alone on their front porch. She looked exhausted, broken. When our eyes met, she slowly walked toward me. I never thought it would go this far, she said softly. I studied her face. You helped destroy my life. Tears filled her eyes. I know. She hesitated before asking the question she clearly feared. Do you think you could ever forgive us? I looked around at the quiet neighborhood, at my home, at the life they had almost taken from me. And I realized something important. The real justice hadn't happened yet, because the final consequences for Mark Halvorson were only beginning. The lies they built, and the truth that destroyed them. The knock at dawn. 3 weeks after the neighborhood meeting, I woke to flashing lights outside my window in Portland. Police cars. 2 of them. They stopped in front of the Halvorsons' house. For a moment, I simply stood there, watching through the curtain. the same house where the lies about me had been born. Officers knocked on the door. It opened slowly. Mark Halvorsen stepped outside. He looked thinner, exhausted. A man who had already lost everything. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. When the officers turned him around and placed handcuffs on his wrists, the meaning was clear. Neighbors slowly stepped outside. Whispers spread down the street. The same people who once avoided me now watched in stunned silence. Mark glanced across the road. Our eyes met for a brief moment. There was no anger left in his expression, only regret. The police led him to the car. The door slammed shut. And just like that, the man who had tried to destroy my life was finally facing the consequences of his own lies. But the real ending to this story wouldn't happen on my street. It would happen months later, inside a courtroom, where the truth would be spoken louder than any rumor ever had been. The courtroom. 6 months later, I walked into the courthouse in Portland. The room was crowded. Reporters, neighbors, even some of Mark's former investors. The story had spread far beyond our quiet neighborhood. People wanted to see the ending. Mark sat at the defense table. He looked like a completely different person. His once expensive suits had been replaced with a plain gray one. The confident developer, who once controlled millions, was gone. The prosecutor stood. And then the evidence began. The fake surveillance footage. The trespassing video from my backyard. The financial records showing the desperate redevelopment deal. One piece at a time, the truth unfolded. Then Tracy was called to the stand. Her voice trembled as she testified. Yes, Mark told me to record the accusations. Gasps filled the courtroom. And yes, we staged the package thefts. The lies that had once destroyed my reputation now collapsed under oath. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom fell silent. The verdict would decide the final chapter of the story. But strangely, I felt calm, because the truth had already won. The verdict. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at Mark Halvorsen. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy. Mr. Halvorsen, he said slowly, the evidence shows a deliberate campaign to defame, harass, and frame an innocent person. Mark stared at the floor. You manipulated your neighbors, filed false reports, and attempted to destroy someone's reputation for financial gain. Every word felt like a weight dropping onto the truth. Then the judge delivered the sentence.
Venus.
Criminal charges, probation, and restitution payments to me. But what struck me most wasn't the punishment. It was what Mark had already lost before the sentence was even announced. His company had collapsed. His investors had abandoned him. The redevelopment project had been canceled. And the house he once lived in across from mine had already been sold. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply watching the lies crumble until nothing remains. As the courtroom emptied, Mark finally looked at me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For a moment, I saw genuine regret. But some damage can't be undone. And the most powerful part of my story was still waiting outside that courthouse. The apology. When I returned to Willow Creek neighborhood, something felt different. People smiled again. Neighbors waved. The same street that once believed the worst about me now treated me like family. That evening, the neighborhood association organized a small gathering. Nothing fancy. Just people standing in the quiet summer air. One by one, they approached me. I should have asked questions before believing those rumors. I'm sorry for how he treated you. I wish we had stood up for you sooner. The apologies were sincere. And surprisingly, they healed something inside me. The truth hadn't just cleared my name. It had reminded everyone how dangerous rumors could be. As the sun set, I stood in my yard looking at my home. The same home someone had tried to take from me. And suddenly, I realized something beautiful. I had never needed revenge. All I needed was the truth. The final justice. A year later, my life looked very different. My story had been picked up by a local journalist in Seattle. What began as a small neighborhood scandal became a national conversation about online rumors and defamation. Ironically, the lies meant to destroy me had given me a new purpose. I now spoke at community events about protecting reputations and questioning viral accusations. But the most meaningful moment happened one quiet evening. I sat on my porch in Portland, watching the sunset. The same porch where I once watched police cars and whispers destroy my life. Across the street, a new family had moved into the Halvorsons' old house. Children played in the yard. Laughter filled the air. Life had moved forward. And so had I. I realized something then that I wish everyone understood. Lies can spread quickly. They can destroy trust. They can turn neighbors into enemies. But the truth has something lies never will.
Time.
Given enough time, the truth always rises. And when it does, the people who built their lives on lies are left standing alone. Meanwhile, the person they tried to destroy finally finds peace. Thank you for listening to my story. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my videos. Thank you.